I recently compiled a list of what I believed to be some of the best first episodes of anime. Episodes that acted as stellar introductions to their worlds, episodes that show you enough details about the main characters to get you interested in them, and of course, episodes that gave you enough of a reason to keep coming back for episode 2 and beyond. Even with a list of 10 entries, inevitably, there were some choice episodes. Very deserving episodes that didn't end up making the cut. So I challenged you in the comments to tell me what shows also had damn good introductions, and very specifically, why. Plenty of you stepped up to bat with intriguing reasons as to why some particular shows are deserving of being on such a list. So today, here on Glass Reflection, we are going to be taking another look at the best first episodes of anime. This time, as suggested by our lovely community. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online community with a multitude of classes geared toward helping people that want to learn new skills or to just be more creative. It's a great starting point to learn how to do pretty much anything with a creative twist on it, from creative writing to even using plants in your home to boost creativity. That's actually a thing. One of the classes that I recently enjoyed was one called Low Budget Filmmaking by Emmy-nominated Maddie Brown. It was a quick 30-minute class that, to me, served as a motivator, reminding you that you can be creative and make creative things without having to break the bank. This is very similar to how I started with video making back in 2009. You know, when all I had was a really cheap camcorder and a bunch of house lights. I have a link down in the description for a trial of Skillshare's premium membership, but it is only available to the first 1,000 of my viewers who check it out. So don't dilly-dally, shilly-shally on that, and try to learn something new. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, let's see what episodes you guys say that I missed. Let's jam.
Hey guys, what is this?
A gate. It connects the inside and outside.
Commenter Daniela says, "The Promised Neverland has a damn good first episode, especially if you go into the series blind. The building feeling of unease with the growing sense that something is going to happen makes the ending of the first episode really stand out as a modern psychological horror anime." In many ways, I would agree. Now, I definitely don't want this video to just be me explaining as to some kind of motivation as to why individual shows weren't on the original list, especially in this case when it is totally deserving of it. Most of the time it just comes down to the fact that limited amount of time. I could have made the video like over an hour long and mentioned a hell of a lot more shows, but I didn't, so things inevitably needed to be cut. Promised Neverland does do an extremely good job at introducing its characters, of giving you a sense that things are not what they seem. If anything, though, like some other shows, such as School Live, its twist is well broadcasted in advance, but not necessarily in a predictable way, which is why it's still good. It's projected in that you know that there is going to be a twist. As the good commenter mentioned, something feels wrong. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why this episode is so good, because when that twist does occur, you feel really good about the fact that you were able to call that before it happened, even if you couldn't necessarily pick up on what is wrong. Because in this particular case, how could you? But then, of course, we have this follow-up comment.
あそこ、見える？
何？
身代。
I think Shinsekai Yori did this, but better, where the Promised Neverland makes you feel like something is not right, and after a while you learn the truth. Sure, it sucks for the characters, but it didn't affect me really all that much. Meanwhile, Shinsekai Yori makes you feel like something is not right, but it is so much worse than you'd expect, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And this is another point where I will fully agree. The downside to Shinsekai Yori's intro is that the first episode really doesn't give you a sense as to where the show's going. In this particular case, that works extremely well. It's good that the show doesn't broadcast where things are going. That makes the changes in the story that much better when they actually happen. Shinsekai Yori is an example of a first episode where you don't have all the pieces. It's very hard to say that this one episode is good on its own, because I don't think it is. But it starts the first couple of steps to a stairway of an amazing show, which is why it, and, you know, the whole show, is worth watching. Winner 9000 has this to say about YuYu Hakusho. YuYu Hakusho has an amazing first episode. I didn't know it was possible to feel for a character in the first episode, but when everyone grieves for Yusuke's death, I felt their grief and their sorrow too. I felt like, damn, even I feel like I know this guy forever, and he's really gone type of vibe. Long story short, it does a great job at making the viewer love the protagonist in the first episode. Personally, I didn't end up watching Yu Yu Hakusho until after I had seen Hunter x Hunter, so seeing just how the mangaka for the original stories in both cases changed so much between the two series was quite interesting for me. But I almost feel like that's why I never thought of Yu Yu Hakusho when I made the original list, because as good as the first episode is, and as good as Yu Yu Hakusho becomes beyond that point, it's not the first story by this mangaka that comes to mind. And of course, the first episode of Hunter x Hunter, it's okay. The show itself is so much better, but in this case, Yu Yu Hakusho does have one powerful intro. Something that a show like this needs nowadays in order to convince people to watch something that's this dated. Which is unfortunate, because it is a great show. Codoloid says this: I'm guessing you forgot this one. The first episode of One Punch Man is so good, it could be an entire series on its own. If you remember something from this show, I'd bet it's likely one of the moments of the first episode. I was basically hooked in the first 5 minutes after Saitama protected the kid with balls for a chin. I don't disagree that One Punch Man has a stellar opening, though I would disagree with the mention that it is the thing that I remember most about One Punch Man. There are so many other things in One Punch Man that I remember better than the first episode, despite the first episode being such a solid intro. Watching the characters duke it out in the canyon, Moomin Rider, and even the show's entire finale are standouts for me. But when you have a show like One Punch Man with such a unique premise, it's hard to say that its intro was not an absolutely stellar one.
You're not going to regret this, are you?
No.
Getting to me mispronouncing names, Matthew Pram has this to say: I'm probably going to get flamed for this, but I'm going to say The Ancient Magus' Bride. You feel that sense of magic this series is known for, while also getting what Chisei and Elias are about. There's also a feeling of warmth that makes you feel like you're going to fall in love with the series. It was quite entrancing. I do agree very largely on this. The intro to Ancient Magus' Bride shows you so much about the world in such a short period of time, while still leaving many questions open for the rest of the series to attempt to discuss and look over. If anything, though, I would say that its first episode isn't necessarily its first episode, as the show did have a 3-episode OVA that came out before it, with a bit more backstory to Chisei's life prior to meeting the Ancient Magus. And of course, extra commenter Melancholy does bring up the fact that the first episode showcases potentially one of the more questionable aspects of the series as a whole. The fact that Chisei was introduced as a character going through human trafficking, basically. That particular plot point can be a bit of a rough one for some people. Always a question about if that was the best way of introducing Chisei and bringing our two main characters together. The only thing that I can say in defense of that particular aspect is that it makes Elias feel very unhuman. It is a part of this first episode and this series as a whole that shows you that this character is not human. They are very much an other. There are different ways that the show could have gone about it and that the mangaka could have written it differently, but I also cannot speak against its particular method of effectiveness if that's what they were going for. Trainman700 says this: "My favorite first episode of any anime is easily the first episode of The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. That anime is what truly introduced me to the medium and does, in my own opinion, a good job at introducing the viewer to the characters and what the show is going to be about." I am going to make the assumption here that they, of course, mean episode 0 of Haruhi Suzumiya. Haruhi Suzumiya does have two different watch orders, both a release order and a chronological order. However, in its official releases, at least here in North America, episode 0 was always placed first, despite the rest of the show being in chronological order. Episode 0 was the introduction for the vast majority of Haruhi fans. And in that way, it does a very good job at least showing you that this is not a normal show. Yes, there might be a lot of trimmings from the genre and other things that are brought into it later, high school, fantasy, a lot of meta-narrative to otakudom at the time. But this first episode, this episode 0, shows you that, yeah, no, we're gonna be different. We're gonna be real different.
We're sorry. Due to the state of special emergency, no lines are currently available. This is a recording.
It's no use. This is dumb. I shouldn't have come here. I guess we won't be meeting here. Maybe I should find a shelter. Huh?
Commenter Jitterai has this to say: "Neon Genesis Evangelion has a great first episode. The arrival, the escape from the angel in Misato's car, the N2 mine detonation, entering the nerve facility, the whole getting the robot and Rei on a stretcher, and then the Eva fight at the end. It sets up the characters, conflicts, and managed to get me hooked on the show instantly." I did mention this briefly in the list proper. Evangelion does so many things right. There is a very good reason as to why this show is still talked about despite coming out in 1995. It is a 25-year-old series that is still a standard for new people getting into anime nowadays. And this first episode is definitely key to that, probably because the final episodes definitely aren't. For me, it was just a balance of what did this episode do well, and did other shows do it better? To which case I would say yes, and that's why Gurren Lagann was on the original list. But despite that, there are so many good things about this show. It's just a shame that by the end of it, the show never kept the same amount of punch to it. Now, of course, 25 years later, we are on the cusp, hopefully, of Evangelion Rebuild 4.0 coming out, but the fact that it took 25 years for this entire story to hopefully have a satisfying conclusion is still very depressing. Still, as we are talking about how good individual first episodes are, it is very hard to knock this one. Commenter Sebastian says, "How did you forget about Texhnolyze? There isn't a single word spoken in the first episode, and yet it says so much." That's exactly why I never brought up Texhnolyze. I bring up Texhnolyze in other places. Back when cons were still a thing and I was talking about hidden gems of anime, Texhnolyze and its first episode is indeed something that I showcase as something very unique. Texhnolyze was made by the same team that basically brought you both Hibine Renmei and Serial Experiments Lane. It is a very weird show. So much so that, again, as the commenter lovingly mentioned, the entire first episode has no dialogue. And while for some people that would probably be insanely interesting and very intriguing, to other people, it's a bore. Now, that's not to say that I think it's a bore. I absolutely love this first episode and the show as a whole. But for most people, it's very hard to sell them on the show with this episode. If you're trying to show off first episodes that showcase the world in an easily explainable way, this is not the first episode for that. Unless you think that its lack of information makes it all that more intriguing. But I feel like it takes a very special kind of person to be able to enjoy that, which is why I never brought it up in the first place. Still though, I cannot deny that it is an amazing first episode, and that Texhnolyze as a series is extremely interesting if you have the patience to try and get through it. But it is not an easy sell.
Right now, all that's in front of me is the shimmering water of the South China Sea, the stirring winds.
All right, Mr. Japanese, I'll ask you one more time. The package you got from the Asahi Industry headquarters in Tokyo, the one you're in charge of until you hand it over to the chief in Borneo, this is it, right?
Yeah, but what I want to know is...
We're all done with you now. You've given us what we wanted.
Commenter Horror Hair had several suggestions, but this one is particularly noteworthy. Okay, I don't know why, but I thought for sure that this would make the list. The first episode of Black Lagoon convinced me that I was going to love this show. And although this one leans heavily into being a two-parter, the importance here is it sets up such a crazy yet invigorating world, with an interesting cast to follow, that I can't help but to mention it. They did nail on the head exactly why Black Lagoon didn't make the original list. Episode 1 and Episode 2 of Black Lagoon is an example of a perfect intro to a series, and one that I very much enjoyed. But unlike more modern shows, like say ReZero, that combine the first 2 episodes into one long introduction, Black Lagoon didn't do that. But ultimately, this was one of those technicality things. The first episode is very good, but it really does need the second episode to finish that story off. The intro of Black Lagoon is absolutely fantastic. It shows you a very different world than what we are used to, with some characters and some archetypes that are so great to watch and see how they interact with one another. But a lot of my favorite aspects to this introduction are all in episode 2, which is why it was hard for me to talk about episode 1. Still though, if you do want this crazy joyride, as the commenter mentions, you could do far worse than this. Michelle DeConti says this: "For me, I gotta say, Steins Gate, because it draws you in, leaving you with so many questions and intrigue. But I think what elevates it when you rewatch the show and realize that every single detail and weird thing had a meaning and a reason." Very true. Steins Gate, as an intro, had a lot of very interesting things, a lot of weird meat to it. Some aspects of the first episode of Steins Gate don't make a lot of sense, at least not on the first watch through. But as both this commenter and as well commenter Golden Piercers mentions, the greatness of Steins Gate's first episode is indeed on its rewatch, for reasons that become apparent by the end of the show. I know we haven't been caring too much about spoilers, but considering that this is kind of a big thing for Steins Gate, I'm not going to bring it up. Still though, I can't deny that this first episode, this introduction and mishmash of time travel and moe fandom, does not deserve to be mentioned. It most certainly does. And that's it. Welcome back to the end of the video. Like last time, I will do my best to have streaming links for the shows in question here today down in the description. But unlike last time, I'm not doing a call to action to continue this and make a commenter edition part 2. I think we're good on that particular end, though next time I do make a top list, we'll see if this is a thing that you guys like to do. Something that you want to see more of, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more community interaction in that regard. So thank you everybody that commented in the original video, especially thank you to those that I was able to highlight today. Sorry that I couldn't highlight everyone, but of course, like the original list, gotta cut it off somewhere. And lastly, a very special thank you to my patrons who not only support my work in general, but also allow me to do videos like this, where I can easily talk about shows that I am not only passionate about, but also ones that you guys are passionate about, obviously. Otherwise, you wouldn't have commented about them. So thank you, patrons. I love and appreciate you all. And especially, though, I want to give particular shout out to patrons Hector Montemayor, Richard Emile Bradley, Rune Jacobson, Ryfen Bonaparte, City Yamako, Wago221, and Calhoun Boy for being especially awesome. You guys are great. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.